Yeah, it's a good thing Bill went through most of the theory, so I can go more quickly through mine. Yeah, mostly what I want to do is present a series of graphs that show data. Bill already did this. Okay, so if one sector is going to run a surplus, another sector has to run a deficit. Okay, that's a key to understanding what's going to follow. The Eurozone crisis, the false claim is that it was driven by out-of-control government spending, especially on the periphery, by these Mediterraneans who can't control themselves, and especially on social programs. This is the story they tell you. All the Greeks are retiring at really young ages, and they have very generous benefit packages. The reality is that many of these countries actually were the paragons of fiscal discipline, running actually budget surpluses before the crisis. The three real problems are excessive private sector debt and lax lending by banks. Exactly the same problem as in the US occurred throughout Europe. Germany's mercantilism, insistence that it will run current account surpluses. And finally, the real problem is that the EMU was designed to fail. It could not succeed, and this is not some new religion that I found. I was arguing this in 1998, that it will fail. You could foresee it very easily. First, the deficits were not out of control before the crisis. You can see across all the countries, even the Mediterraneans, their deficits were not out of control. Government debt as a percent of GDP was not out of control. It was not rising on trend in any of these countries until the crisis. Net debt as a percent of GDP. On the left-hand side, we have the government debt, and this is by year. So you see before the crisis, the first dot shows you what the debt ratios are. My argument is none of these would be an unreasonable debt ratio for any sovereign country that issues its own currency. The private sector debts, however, were huge. Okay, and in a couple of cases close to the U.S. Private sector debt ratios. So it really is a private sector debt problem that became a government debt problem when some of these nations chose to bail out their banks. And so especially Ireland is and Iceland is the best example of a Euro nation that did that. Getting to Bill's comments about the sectoral balances, this is a nice way to display these if you haven't seen it before. If we look at the Euro area as a whole, it basically runs a balanced current account. So we see little tiny blues here in recent years. They've been running current account surpluses. The sign is reversed. We see the private sector balance, which has been positive all the time except back in 2000. That means the private sector taken as a whole is saving. And that has to be identically equal to the sum of the government's balance and the foreign balance. Since foreign balance is just about zero, the government deficit is allowing the private sector to save. And you can see that there is a cyclical nature here, but it always balances. Here is Germany. Germany runs a very large current account surplus. It accounts for about 80% of all the current account surpluses among the Euro nations. And that allows it to have a very small government deficit while the private sector has huge savings. Okay, and this is why Germany doesn't have the private sector debt problem, because its private sector is allowed to save because they export to the rest of Europe. Here is France, which has not a large, but a positive current account deficit, plus its private saving equals its budget deficit. So the reason that its budget deficit has grown tremendously is because the private sector got scared and they're saving. They're not spending. That creates the government sector deficits. Here is Spain. Spain looks something like the US, but even worse. Very large private sector deficits. And that allowed Spain to be the paragon of fiscal responsibility with government sector surpluses. And that has reversed. Now the private sector got scared. They are running positive saving, and so the government deficit exploded. Here is Italy, current account deficits with small private sector surpluses equals the government deficit. Okay, so the story is very obvious. This is not a case of runaway government spending. It's a case of the deficit being the balancing item to the current account deficit plus the saving of the private sector. The euro is the problem. Let me wave your hand, because I have several more slides, but I don't have to do all of them now. The euro is the problem. By adopting the euro, the sovereign nations have turned into some of the U.S. states, as I was saying at the last session. Unlike U.S. states, euro governments have to fund pensions and health care. We don't ask California and New York to fund the pensions and the health care of their entire populations. The federal government does that more or less. You know that our federal government is not generous in these things. Okay, euro governments had to deal with not only pensions and health care, but also banking problems. Again, we don't ask our states to bail out the banks when you have a banking crisis. But the euro states had to do that. Here are the U.S. states' debt to GDP ratios. These are some of the biggest ones. And as I said, they're nothing like 60% of GDP. The markets will shut them down if they try to increase their debt ratios on these very low numbers. Now, we do have a state deficit and debt problem in the U.S. now. I think in California, about 1/3 of the government spending is deficit finance spending. Social spending, you can see that contrary to the story that's always told about the Mediterraneans, they don't have generous social safety nets. Greece's is much less than Germany's and France's and so on. What is the center really trying to do? They're trying to protect their banks. They don't want to get stuck. France and Germany don't want to get stuck bailing out their banks. This is why they're insisting that Greece and Italy and Spain have to service their debt. They have to use austerity, try to squeeze the last euro possible out of the populations to postpone the inevitable, which is these banks are going to fail. So you can see that most of Italy's debt is held in France. The story will change a bit depending on the country, but that really is the problem. What's the solution? Bill already said it. They're going to very likely go back to their own currencies because, as Bill said, it just doesn't seem likely that you're going to get Germany and probably not even France to agree to the things that actually would resolve the problem, which is either to give the European Parliament a budget of 20% of European GDP. Right now it's only about $100 billion equivalent, much less than 1%, so you would have to have 20 times the spending available to the European Parliament to be redistributed among the states. I don't believe that's going to happen. Or the ECB stand ready and say, we will buy all Greek debt and guarantee a 3% interest rate. That's not going to happen either, so it's much more likely that they will go back. How do they do it? The government immediately announces from now on, we spend in drachma or lira or whatever, and we tax in drachma or lira. Now, Warren would not change private contracts. He would leave those in euros. This is something we can discuss. It solves some problems and creates some problems, but it could be the easiest way to go.